The great leap in maturity with the Beatles would occur with the production of Rubber Soul, beginning on the 12th of October, 1965. However, before we begin talking about our favorite album about prostitutes and lesbians, we need to observe the history of the band and the lead up to Rubber Soul. Before the creation of this album, the Beatles experienced the socio-cultural phenomenon of Beatlemania. This video, however, will not cover the societal effects of Beatlemania, but rather how the events of Beatlemania will affect the members of the band as a whole. To analyze this evolution of maturity within the Beatles, we will need to rewind to a great anomaly within the Beatles' early discography. If I Fell is the third track of the album A Hard Day's Night. What makes If I Fell so unique within their early discography is not necessarily the instrumentation itself, but rather the lyrical significance. If I Fell is not a simplistic love song, breakup song, or situational song. It speaks of love as a concept, or more specifically, of what it could be or not. The song reflects upon both Lennon and McCartney's confusion of romance, intimacy, and love as a whole during the period. The song questions and continues to question, and leaves so many of these questions unanswered. It only fantasizes about what an ideal love could be, and begs, if he were to fall in love, that it would not be in vain. The song demonstrates the first small step of maturity which the Beatles take in their songwriting ability, and again, clearly demonstrates the romantic and intimate confusion which Lennon and McCartney and the rest of the group would have experienced during Beatlemania, a step of maturity. The next track I would like to mention within this context would be I'm a Loser. Again, this song is an anomaly within the Beatles album Beatles for Sale, released on the 4th of December, 1964. The song doesn't fall into the generic lyrical boundaries of the vast majority of their works during the period. I'm a Loser is the first song in their entire discography where Lennon speaks of himself. Lennon in his later career would always speak of how much he preferred to be writing about himself rather than anything else. Lennon, however, would experience levels of shyness with this writing method. Often, in many of his songs, such as the later Nowhere Man, he would intentionally play songs in the third person rather than the first person, out of fear of being ridiculed due to his openness over his emotions. The song is quite direct with its language. Lennon speaks of how the burden of all the failed attempts to create intimacy or love in his life have weighed him down, and though he may act and laugh like a clown, deep down he knows that he's just a loser. This form of writing in the first person, rather than the situational writing he would previously place himself into, would stick with him for the rest of his career. Moving on to the next LP release, Help, along with the track of the same name, Lennon continues to use this form of first-person writing, speaking very highly of the track in his later career in a lyrical sense. The song is As It Appears, a cry for help. Help, as an album, however, was more so a step of maturity than any of the previous albums. The entire album has a different vibe, so to speak. Instrumentally, it doesn't have the same levels of positive energy as the previous recorded. The primary rockers of the album, The Night Before, Another Girl, etc., are very much lacking in the energy in comparison to the tracks of the former albums, such as Kansas City and Rock and Roll Music. More pianos and keyboards are utilized in this record, while more softer folk elements are also implemented, as demonstrated by songs such as You've Gotta Hide Your Love Away, It's Only Love, I've Just Seen a Face, and You Like Me Too Much. Furthermore, many of the lyrics within the album become significantly more cynical, as demonstrated by Another Girl and You're Gonna Lose That Girl. The songs are no longer this kind of go-lucky, go-getter bullshit of She Loves You or I Wanna Hold Your Hand. Rather, they're more cynical and envious than previous tracks. Help does not receive enough credit as a step towards the maturity of the band. I would in fact argue that Help demonstrated a leap of maturity comparable to that of Rubber Soul. The explanations for this change in sound are numerous, but can be summarized into a few main focal points. Number 1. The influence of Bob Dylan. Around this time, all of the Beatles began listening to the work of Mr. Zimmerman. They first met Dylan and his second studio album, Freewheelin', on the 28th of August 1964, while on tour in New York City. His influence began to have a greater and greater impact ever since. Number 2. Effects of touring. The Beatles had effectively been living a life of constant touring and playing for the last 5 years of their lives. It may very well have been that they were simply tired of producing and playing the same basic rock and roll bangers day after day. 3. Drugs. All of the Beatles by this point were frequent users of marijuana and hallucinogenics. This undoubtedly had effects on the creative process and levels of energy. This topic is also undoubtedly worth a video of its own, but for the sake of time, we'll have to move on. 4. Not necessarily a point, but just a reminder that the Beatles were all human beings. People change, some forever and not for better. The weights and stressors of life, including constant touring, Lennon's marriage, making films, sexual experiences, hallucinogenic experiences, and many other factors in the lives of the band, all produced biopsychosocial events which, due to limited knowledge and current standings of the band as a whole, we shall never truly understand. There is one more track I would like to touch up on before we move on. Yesterday. Now, as we all know, everything I say is 100% factual and of definitive empirical opinion among the working class proletariat. Yesterday isn't that important. Now, before you freaks begin dumping the comments section with death threats, listen to these points. Number 1. Instrumentally, the song is not that unique compared to the previous tracks which the group had made or covered. I'll Follow the Sun, Till There Was You, and I Love Her, etc. With the only notable exception being the decision of George Martin to add stringed instruments. Number 2. Lyrically, yes, it's a beautiful song, but in reality, it's a breakup song told in the first person, just as several tracks the group had produced beforehand. Therefore, this song led to no significant lyrical or instrumental development for the band. Again, it's a beautiful S-tier song, but I want to eliminate the theory that this song, for some reason, caused a magical epiphany amongst the Beatles that led to some sort of deranged musical revolution of the second half of the 1960s. It just doesn't make any sense. If anything, the only significant development this song caused was a general disdain against Paul by the rest of the band due to the whole Paul is number one without the Beatles scandal that reflected harshly on the entire group, including Paul himself, whom, after a sarcastic remark by Lennon after a live show on the 1st of August 1965, stopped playing the song in its entirety due to how greatly it upset him. A musical masterpiece, but an utter tragedy for the chemistry and foundational stability of the Beatles. Ironically, the Beatles would later record one of their hardest tracks of their entire discography, I'm Down, finished on June 18th. Soon after, they would begin touring once more. To me, I view the song as one last fit of rage, exhausted, infuriated, and frustrated by the lack of time to record, rest, and seldom time after 5 long years of what Robbie Robertson describes as an unsustainable lifestyle of life on the road. The Beatles, upon finishing their 1965 American tour, which featured their performance at Shea Stadium, took a 6-week break to rest and recover from the gruesome sequence of shows. During this break, the Beatles were left plenty of time to experiment and develop their songwriting process. As soon as the 6 weeks were over, they headed back to EMI Studios to record once more. The Beatles would soon have a whole month to record and produce another album until they had to go on tour to the UK once again at the beginning of December. The production of what would later become Rubber Soul would become a landmark achievement for the band, a great leap of maturity, and would define the music of the era and for years to come.